Coming up on this week's show, Sony do a big U-turn.
An amazing Zelda remake.
And we talked to 8-bit and TV legend Peter Scott.
The Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each week in part with our incredible friends at Bitmap Books. Now, if you're a fan of the original Game Boy, or maybe just discovering the wonders of Nintendo's million-selling portable system, you need to check out Game Boy, the Box Art Collection, a vibrant celebration of some of the finest ever cover artwork for the monochrome Marvel that kickstarted the handheld games industry. You can check that out and lots more on their website at bitmapbooks.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 272, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to our weekly roundtable chat all about retro gaming, bringing you up to date on what's been happening in retro gaming and tech over the last 7 days, and then bringing you an industry veteran on the second half of the show. And that is really what this podcast is about, isn't it? Taking you back to the days when you got home from school and couldn't wait to get on your Super Nintendo, or going game shopping for Commodore 64 games on a Saturday with your mates, and collecting and keeping those systems alive today.
Yeah, totally. I just love games.
Bottom line, we love games. That is the bottom line.
And there is kind of a theme that runs through what we do, I think. The fact that a good video game is a good video game regardless of when it was made. Because, we were talking about last week this story about Sony that we're going to pick up on in a moment because there's been a big backtrack. But I think the point of that, the fact that they were going to discontinue all of the PlayStation 3, the Vita, the PSP stores, and really a lot of people online have been saying these are still good games. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's kind of like, watching a movie from the 70s or 80s, I can enjoy it just like I can playing an old video game or listening to an older piece of music. Just because it's a few decades old doesn't mean that it's not good anymore. You know
what? That's literally how I try to describe it to people. When people ask me about my hobbies or whatever at work, and I say, I'm really big into retro gaming, they go, what's that? And I say, I always say, your Sega. And they go, I had a Sega when I was a kid, and they go, why'd you play them? And I'm just like, well, it's the same as if you listen to a song from the 80s or the 90s, or if you watched a film from the 80s or the 90s. And every now and then you get, those heathens who go, I don't like old films. I don't like old-fashioned films. I only watch new films. And I'm like, all right, mate, sado. But it is the same as that. You just hit the nail on the head there. It's what's the difference in listening to, Thriller by Michael Jackson or playing the Mega Drive? What's the difference in terms of age? Do you know what I mean?
It takes you back to a time period as well. Everything that was associated with it, and stuff like Games Master and, the Big Breakfast and kind of TV and culture of the time. And, we have all these memories associated with it. And this week's guest is an absolute legend and actually worked on Games Master and the Big Breakfast.
I like what you did there.
That was very smooth, Ravi. Yeah, now today we're going to be joined by Peter Scott. Now, Peter is a really interesting guy. Recently, we've been covering quite a bit of the BBC Micro on the show, and he actually was quite a prolific BBC Micro and Acorn Electron programmer. Did a lot of ports of games that were available on other systems to the Acorn platform, like Predator, SimCity. He did a really good version of that for the BBC Micro, and then went on to do a Simpsons game on the NES as well, and then got into the glamorous world of early 90s TV. And he did work on Games Master alongside Dominic Diamond. Of course, we've covered that quite a lot recently, but also a show called The Big Breakfast. Now, for people that don't live in the UK and aren't of a certain age, how do you sum up The Big Breakfast, Ravi?
It was kind of like everybody must have been on something that were presenting it, because they were far too lively that early in the morning, and it was the 90s, so they probably were. And or there must have been a lot of drink going around. It was like a kind of chaotic breakfast, the breakfast that your mum and dad wouldn't want. And you could watch it on TV, and it was very naughty, very rude, and there were lots of shows like that. We had TFI Friday as well, which was that nearly got taken off air because that was before the Watershed, and they were very rude as well and stuff. So it's this kind of period of bad attitude, crazy kind of stuff, and it's amazing going from being a BBC Micro developer then going into like one of the big cultural shows and then doing crazy stuff as well. Like he started working for Live TV, which is one of these digital TV channels as well, and they had some absolutely mad stuff. But the thing that really fascinates me about Peter Scott, this week's guest, was him working on SimCity and actually porting that to the BBC. Like, what a challenge it is to actually fit SimCity on the BBC and get it all working and functioning, and it was such a big title at the time.
Yeah, so Peter Scott, really interesting guy. He's going to be our special guest. We've got a lot to cram into this week's interview, and he'll be coming up in around 20 minutes from now. Now let's jump straight into the news stories this week. No sooner did we mention it on the show and the internet went into meltdown that Sony confirmed they were killing off the PlayStation 3, PSP and Vita stores, and now they've had a bit of a change of heart, it seems.
Yeah, so Jim Ryan, who's the president and CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, released a statement earlier this week. Essentially, I won't read the whole thing, but he essentially said, recently we notified that we're going to be turning off the PS3, PS Vita and PSP stores over the summer. However, upon further reflection, it's clear that they'd made the wrong decision, so they're happy to announce that they're going to continue to support the PS3 and PS Vita stores, but they are still switching off the PSP store on July 2nd, 2021. And essentially they're saying, there wasn't enough resources to keep them going. Essentially, everybody's gone out there and bought a load of games. I mean, we mentioned it. A lot of YouTubers have made videos about it and stuff like that. But I can't help but think there's just some sort of like money-making thing here.
This is where I go on my anti-capitalist rant. Basically, I think like there's been a reaction around the web going, oh, Sony have listened to the fans. Oh, and it's like, it's just that expectation that they'll be dicks and like just take a store like this away. Or, it's like they chose to take it offline, and it mustn't cost that much compared to the amount of money that they're making. And surely it's only a few servers on like Amazon web server or something.
Well, that's what got me, because in the statement he says, the idea was for them to move focus and more resources onto newer devices, so they could bring us more, better things for PS4, PS5, and the next generation of VR. It literally says. And
in other words, go out and buy a new console.
Yeah, and it's just like Ravi says, and literally what you've just said there, Dan. It's just like, really, is it really costing that much to keep it running? Do you know what I mean? Like, or is it literally like only a couple of sales were being made a day on the PSP and PS3 store, and now all of a sudden like 1 million sales have probably been made?
Well, there was a video Metal Jesus Rocks did, which was like, go out and buy these games because they're going to disappear. And I reckon a lot of people went out and bought them. And then the dollar sign started going in Sony's eyes again.
And you know what? I was moaning about that, like, not specifically him or anything like that, but I was moaning to my friends last week saying, all these YouTubers have jumped on the bandwagon. They're saying, go buy these games and stuff. But actually, I did like Metal Jesus' video because he said, go buy these games which are super expensive and never came out, in America or the UK, and only came out in Japan. And if you want to buy it physical, it's like $500. So I get, he was like, go buy it for a $5 now. But yeah, it's just interesting. I could be
wrong, but I think like, what is the cost here? Like, bandwidth wise, if you want people to download the game slowly and you're not rinse your bandwidth, then you can just slow it down a bit. And, everybody's on internet services where they're not paying per minute. So, yeah, I don't quite get why they want to turn the stores off. Maybe, like you said, it was to push people into the direction of another console or to another store, or maybe like buying the new versions of the games on the PS5 or whatever.
Yeah.
The one thing for me, I've seen a lot of outcry about this, and for a lot of people, especially people who may, a bit younger than us, who maybe the PlayStation 3 was kind of one of their earlier systems, suddenly realizing that, games on digital stores are not permanent, and how you are at the mercy of these companies that can flip the switch. And to a lot of people, it's kind of brought the idea of video game preservation to the front of mind over the last week, I think, which is, obviously an important point. But then I'm looking here, the fact they were going to turn off the PS Vita, and I'll link this list from Metacritic in our show notes. There are actually 5 games that came out on the PS Vita already this year. The latest one only came out last week. Astro Aqua Kitty came out on April 15th. So the fact that they were going to turn it off when games are literally people are still producing games for that platform.
And it's sad that this is now the exception. This has become standard that all these stores get turned off, and when it doesn't happen and they listen to demand, people suddenly go yay, and it's like no, it shouldn't be standard. I think as long as these companies are making a lot of money, they should keep all their services open and not kill the old hardware off like that.
Yeah, 100%. And like you say, it kind of rolls into the next thing we were going to talk about as well. Does it drive up the cost of the physical releases for those consoles?
Yeah.
For the PSP, the Vita, and the PS3.
Well, because apparently, like PS3 physical games now, the prices are kind of skyrocketing. Because I mean, it got to the stage where you could get them for like £2 or £3 in CX, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that's all that was in CX.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is some certain games, Demon Souls. I'm trying to think of some others. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any exclusives right now. But there is a lot of games that have suddenly jumped up, and I found an article here where a guy called Ghetto Gamer, essentially, not that long ago, bought Splatterhouse for the PS3 for $25, and now it's over $100 on eBay. And I wonder whether it's all kind of like off the back of this. Do you know what I mean? It's just games are just skyrocketing, like Demon Souls.
Maybe by knocking it out, they've kind of spurred the whole market on, and now they're thinking, oh god, unless they're planning a PS3 Mini. We don't know about it.
I think Sony have been burnt on the Mini thing already. I don't think they'll do another one.
I don't think they will either. But it's just I don't know. Just this last kind of year, obviously, I know we've had. I don't want to talk too much about COVID and stuff like that, but just the market. In a gaming market, a retro game market, whatever you want to call it. PS3 is it retro gaming kind of thing. It's just been crazy. It's been so up and down, but it just seems to be up at the moment. Everything's so expensive kind of thing.
The next thing's going to be those Wii Fit boards that are stacking up everywhere. They're going to hit the roof. Like, I saw PS3 games going for like 50p a few years ago, and £1, and just stacks, and nobody wanted them.
My friend about 4 or 5 years ago used to go around all the Kexes in Nottingham, CEXs, and he used to pick up original Xbox games because they were selling them for 50p for any game. And he was trying to get a full Xbox collection. And now those games, I'm not saying they're worth hundreds or anything like that, but certainly a lot of them are worth like £5, £10, £15 now, whereas he was picking up for 50p from CEX.
I do remember in the cash converters in our city centre here in Nottingham, last time I was there, I think they had a shelf of about 50 Wii Fit boards for about £2.50 each. So, if they're going to go in value, that's where I am this weekend.
You could build a like gaming shed out of Wii Fit boards.
We just go over to Dan's, he's built an extension onto the side of his house out of Wii Fit boards.
But, all joking aside, I do think that it is important that, this subject has been raised. In the mainstream media over the last week, people have been wondering, why we're letting classic video games just disappear. Because, I mean, you're talking about the fact that they were thinking of closing down those stores. Apparently, 2,200 titles would suddenly just not be available anymore, and over 130 of them were only on those digital stores. So I do think it is a good thing, actually. That is one thing good that's come out of this, that people are now realising that, look, we need to preserve the history of gaming, and it is important that we still have a way to play these games.
Maybe that's why, Wii U and PS3 and stuff like that's going to shoot up now, because people are starting to realise, the newer consoles don't have the physical ones. You can get a version without a disc drive.
Yeah, which I think, maybe this will put some people off getting the digital-only versions of consoles. Now they actually give it some thought. So maybe it kind of goes back to that analogy we mentioned in the intro there. Imagine if all of a sudden, like, Netflix deleted, all movies from, the 2000s, because, we've given up on that generation now. You lost, a decade's worth of movies and you could never watch them again.
Yeah, that would suck. and it's weird because as well, obviously this must affect the multiplayer function. So maybe they were willing to see all the multiplayer games suddenly hit the floor, and maybe a lot more people downloaded them, and they might be looking at the servers and then going, oh god, there's more people playing multiplayer. And usually it's down to the fans. Sadly, it's down to the fans to save a feature like this. Obviously Sega went down the pan, and you get the Dreamcast online one, which you can now connect with with a kind of hack server and stuff. But yeah, if fans can host it, then why can't a company that's making millions and millions and billions of pounds host it like easily? You know,
because they don't want to.
They want to buy PlayStation 5.
Billions.
Yeah, because they want to make more billions. Yeah, exactly. You want to play Resident Evil on the PS3? Well, go buy it on the PS5.
I wonder if I could get a PS5.
Yeah, exactly.
Now let's talk about a classic video game franchise that's coming back for 2021, and this is Leisure Suit Larry. Now there is a new game called Wet Dreams Dry Twice that is coming to the Switch in May. And there is a trailer here. It has got, Leisure Suit Larry to me has always been a bit hit or miss. I'll be honest, really the only one that I've properly got into was the original game, the LLO classic from 1987. I remember having that, in the 90s, and you get that bit at the beginning where it actually quizzes you to find out if you're old enough to play the game. But all the questions are like, who was the American president in 1932? Like that. So you go down to your dad, like, Dad, there's a quick question for my school homework.
I bet your dad was like, I ain't got a clue.
Well,
yeah, no Google that.
That whole original like Larry Laffer games, they went up to like Love for Sale 1996 was like a really good kind of period, and then they had another set of games which came out, which was Larry Lovage games. There were two of them, and then Replay Games. There was another one of which was Leisure Suit Larry Reloaded. So there's been a lot of attempts to kind of bring Larry back, but I played this one myself. Wet Dreams Don't Dry, which was the original one. This is They Dry Twice, and it's really, really, really good and really funny. Like, because the whole thing is Larry gets put in a time machine, transported to the modern day. But even back in the 80s, Larry had this like 70s vibe. He was uncool, and now he's even more uncool because he's entering a world with like feminism, with apps, with there's a dating app called Timber. And he hasn't even got a phone, so he's got to learn how to use that. And there's like Bill Jobs or Steve Gates is the big head. And like, I've talked about this game before, but I really absolutely loved it. And it's a really good vibe. And I think it's going to be ideal on the Switch,
So I was going to say, so this is essentially a re-release of that game onto the Switch?
It's the second part.
It's the second part of
that game, yeah.
Okay, cool.
So this one, he's got a Pi phone, and the Pi phone's turned into a Pi bot, which is a new thing. And he also gets trapped in virtual reality, where he ends up in the old early 8-bit Larry game.
That's awesome.
That does sound fun. Because to me, I was looking at this and I thought, well, I remember Larry was in his 40s back in like the original game in 87. So I thought, well, he must be knocking on that into his 70s now. I didn't realise there was a time travel element in there, but that does make sense.
Yeah, and it's just hilarious, him just trying to work everything out with like coming from the 70s.
I just love that, Nintendo, the family-friendly console, that they've got away with Wet Dreams Dry Twice.
And if you look at the screenshots in this, pretty much every screenshot has got something phallic.
Yep.
At some stage in the background or just hidden away.
I've just been studying them to try and find them.
Yeah. The head CEO is called Mr. Wang.
There you go.
It's a really cool game.
The idea of this, it's all tongue-in-cheek. It's very, carry-on movie, isn't it? It's all good-natured fun. And I know some people are looking at this. I've seen some of the comments going, there's no place for this in 2021. But I think the fact that they do take the mick out of Larry, the fact that he is dated and he is old-fashioned.
The thing is, as well, he's in this, it's really smart. He's not like coming out with a few awful jokes, but it's not like crass or it's not like kind of out of place. It's him with like PC society and trying to fit in, but he's harmless. He's not like a horrible pervert or anything. He's just
a loser.
A loser.
He's a loser.
Yeah, exactly. He's a loser just trying to get on in the modern world and fit in. So it's got a lot of social context and it's got a lot of stuff. There is still obviously a lot of sex jokes because that is the staple of the series, but It is very funny.
This comes out.
Yeah.
I love the description they've got in this Nintendo Life article about his voice. Larry's got a voice like a tuba made out of nostrils.
Yeah, he sounds well nasally. He's like, hi.
I am Larry.
Yeah, so, that's exactly it, yeah.
So this comes out on the 18th of May as well. So not long to wait for it, Dan.
We all like a bit of old-fashioned smut. Now, let's talk about a demake. Now, we do love these when modern video games are kind of scaled down to look like they could belong on classic platforms. And this is Zelda Breath of the Wild that's had a Game Boy Color demake. Now, I know Breath of the Wild, Ravi, is like, it's pretty much the only Zelda game you've really ever got into.
Yeah, I love it, man. I just love the music and the relaxed pace of it and everything. And also the fact that for the whole blooming game, you're trapped halfway on the plains on this mountain bit, and then you have to get out into the plains and stuff. And looking at this, they've got it sectioned off with that big annoying wall, and you have to get past everything and then get on it. And I was just listening, and the music sounds really nice as well.
Oh, this is the music, yeah. Really relaxing. A nice 8-bit rendition of the theme. And this is actually all done by one guy, a developer who goes by the name Ohana Studios, who's ported this to look like a Game Boy Color version of Breath of the Wild. And you must be into this, Joe. This is so you.
Yeah, man. This looks... I absolutely adore Link's Awakening. Obviously, that got re-released, remade a couple of years ago now. But the original Link's Awakening is one of my favourite... Probably is my favourite Game Boy game ever made. And then it looks really similar to that, and then really similar to Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages, which were Game Boy Color games. This looks beautiful. So he has stated that it is just a demo at the moment, and it's not
Please
the full
don't sue
game.
me, Nintendo, he says. Yeah,
so he has literally put in the description of the video he's posted, this is not a full game. Please don't sue me, Nintendo. It's just a prototype. I made it for fun because I love old school Game Boy Color Zelda titles. And then he's further said, I might swap the assets for my own. Some are already, if you notice from the video. And I'll make it a full non-Zelda survival Game Boy Color style game out of this. I'd actually love to do that because I love the game and also the art style so much. So he knows Nintendo will probably gun for him if it gets any sort of traction. But yeah, man, this looks beautiful.
I just want to see the horse bit. He
Yeah,
needs to get
yeah.
a horse. It would be good to see like little clips of what he's doing and kind of developing this. But it's a really nice idea. I love demake games.
Yeah, man, it's really nice. It's just a 2-minute video at the moment, but like you say, he's mainly in the plains, and he's got that big wall, that big drop, kind of cutting it off and stuff. But it'd be interesting for him to carry on, see what he does with it. And if he does get the whole stop making it from Nintendo, like he says, he'll just take his own assets, and it'd be nice, to see something like this on like limited run or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing we were saying last week, isn't it? About these kind of Nintendo fan remakes, that if you can disguise them, maybe you can make it a Zelda game to get the publicity. Then when Nintendo kind of side-eye it, you just turn it into something else. Well, it's not Zelda, and change the sprites a little bit.
It's Zelda.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it could be a way around it, I guess. But,
yeah.
Yeah, it does look really good, though. And to me, I love Breath of the Wild as well, but there is something about that kind of classic, 8-bit RPG that it's just really cozy to play, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of describing it, cozy. And Breath of the Wild, like Ravi said, it's a relaxing game. Like, you don't have to go... you just made you're just cooking your dinner and stuff in it like that.
Yeah.
You don't really get to
battle now.
Yeah, you don't really get to do that in like classic 8-bit RPGs. Whereas he has actually got that element of it in this, in this little trailer he's made. So, yeah, I could imagine people, if this was to get like an actual release, people actually picking it up and playing it.
Well, people on the YouTube video that we'll obviously put in our show notes have been, begging him, like, please put something out that we can play. So he's saying that maybe by the weekend he might actually release a small playable version, just like a level or two that people can play. So keep an eye out for that before Nintendo see it. Now, speaking actually of Nintendo demakes or remakes, this one actually soups up one of the best Mario games ever. This is Super Mario 64 Plus, an unofficial PC port with 60 frames per second, and apparently you can actually kill Mario.
Yeah, permadeath mode on this.
Oh,
yeah,
please play the music, Dan. It's so good.
All right, here we go.
Yeah, so this comes from some hardcore fans once again. who released this game earlier this month. So yeah, Super Mario 64 Plus essentially is a PC port of Super Mario 64, unofficial, of course, which has already picked up 30,000 downloads, showing that there's a huge market for killing Mario, and a huge market for playing Mario games on the PC, which is pretty cool. But yeah, it plays at a solid 60 frames per second. They've sorted out a couple of the glitches from the original game, so I don't think you can do the backwards jump thing anymore, if you guys know what that is. But it just looks really nice, and it's got, like Ravi said, it's got some awesome music in it as well. Now, the guys who have made this have said they're confident that Nintendo won't come for them. I don't know. I think they will at 30,000 downloads.
Why are they so confident then?
I don't know. It just says this, it's showing there's a huge market for killing Mario. What have they said here? Blah, 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 blah.
Since there aren't any official Mario games on the PC, they reckon Mario 64 isn't a direct threat.
There you go. Is that what they've said?
Yeah, that's okay. Optimistic.
That is really optimistic. I don't know. I mean, they've had 30,000 as of the 20th of April.
They're hosting the launcher and the builder, but not the game itself. So you need your own copy of Super Mario 64, and you put it in, and then the launcher and the builder rebuilds it all and adds these tweaks in and stuff. So they're kind of not got any of the assets in there or
Nintendo
you provide your own ROM.
Yeah. They'll take them down. They always do.
It is interesting because I think, we've talked about it before when people love a game that much that they want to kind of soup it up and make it, give it a new lease of life and fix the things that were wrong with the original game, which I think is an awesome thing to do. And I think they've made the right choice there then, Ravi, if that's the way it works. If you actually need your original cartridge and all they're doing is kind of giving you a way to play that cartridge better, I guess.
Yeah, I guess
kind of
like
ripping it all.
It's a PC engine and not the console PC engine, but an engine for the PC. And they'll obviously be adding the new features and that will be done in the build. So maybe they can do a port that would be a modified ROM for the original console N64 or the Wii U. Come on, I'd love to see one. But it's a cool idea, and I've not really seen many of these ROM hacks and stuff. Maybe there's a standard engine for actually creating these things in, but it says here, it's got the bug fixes, optional extra modes as well. Continue the level after getting a star, improved camera angles as well, and more responsive controls, which seems good, yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that it doesn't contain any of their Nintendo copyrighted assets, I guess, a very wise way of doing it. That's one thing when you get to the 3D era. I mean, we've seen it with other platforms as well. The fact that these are all kind of, polygons and textures, you can actually upscale them and make them look like modern games. And, this running at 60 frames a second, it looks amazing.
And you can run a texture pack on it as well. And I think they're saying that they've got a custom texture pack as well. So that might be quite cool because they're probably replacing the assets then with other textures and stuff and then using the original mod to add stuff in there.
Yeah, wise way of doing it. So fingers crossed this one will stay up. And it is available for download now. Maybe Sonic is more your thing, though. Some fans have actually built a 3D Sonic game using Dreams. Now, what's Dreams?
Dreams? Is that the program that was on the PlayStation? It was like this PlayStation creation program for creating games.
Yeah, from what I understand, we're just doing this from memory because you actually told me about it last time we mentioned it. It is essentially, like you say, it's like an open source game engine, which essentially you don't have to kind of pay for or register that you're a games company trying to buy Unreal Engine or something like that. But yeah, this has been made on the PS5 version of Dreams. Essentially, it looks like Sonic Adventure, but really, really nice, like maybe the nicest version of it we've ever seen. But Dan, you compared it to one of the more recent Sonic games. I can't remember which one you said it was. It's Sonic
Generations.
Sonic Generations.
The 3D bits of that, yeah.
But yeah, this looks. We've spoke about Sonic remakes and Sonic fan remakes so many times before. Just do it, man. Just do it, Sega. Just make it. The market for Sonic at the moment is probably the biggest it's ever been since the 90s. With the success of the last film, they're now making another one, aren't they?
Yeah.
Kids are gonna lap it up. They'll sell 5 million copies to kids alone, and then they'll sell about 5 million copies to me.
It's pretty interesting because this Dreams thing, it looks really easy to use as well. with like a little interface in there, and it's all drag and drop and stuff. But they've also got Dreams VR.
Yeah.
So maybe you can do Sonic in VR.
In VR. That'd be sick when you're running.
I think you made a good point there, Joe. It does kind of feel like the time is right for a big, proper, high-budget new Sonic game. I mean, I know the last one we had was Sonic Mania, which was obviously like, a throwback to the original Sonic games on the Mega Drive. I think the last 3D games I got were the ones on the Wii U that are probably quite forgettable to a lot of people. I think Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric, I think, was the last one I got.
See, I didn't play any of them. They looked very, and fair enough to them. It looked aimed at kids, like kiddie kids kind of thing. And I get it. Maybe that's where Sonic is these days, but I feel like we need a proper successor to the Sonic Adventure games. I mean, I know we had Sonic Heroes on the GameCube, PS2 and stuff, but I just feel like it's now the right time for us to, Sonic Adventure's free or something like that. It's definitely time for it. In those games, kids can play those games and adults can play those games as well. But yeah, this In Dreams one looks beautiful.
And it's quite cool that they've got this creation tool that, you can actually use on the modern consoles, because I don't know many other systems like other than Mario Maker.
Yeah.
There's not that much creation or creativity going on. So this is pretty cool.
These guys should do have made this Sonic 3D port in Dreams. They should actually just finish the game and go to Sega and be like, look, will you release this?
Yeah.
And then, Sega are cool. They'll probably work with them. All right, yeah, good idea.
Yeah, Sonic are pretty cool. Sega are pretty... Yeah, Sonic is cool.
Sonic's cool as well.
But yeah, Sega are usually pretty cool with these things. So, it would be nice, if they did that or something. I mean, it looks like they've done quite a lot already. I mean, the video's only 6 minutes long, but in the video, they're playing all different levels and stuff like that in different zones. So this isn't something they've whipped up over a weekend. They've done this over a good couple of months. Maybe something will come of it, but I doubt it. We've seen a couple of things like this in the last couple of years, haven't we?
I mean, Sonic in 3D is always a bit hit or miss for me. I think, the original adventure games I loved, which weirdly seem to have got a bit of a bad rep. I think we mentioned that before. Over the last maybe 10 years or so, I see a lot of people slagging them off and saying they weren't actually good games, which kind of blows my mind, because I remember those being like system sellers for the Dreamcast.
Yeah,
and people,
when they came out in like 2000 or whatever it was, I remember them being well loved. Like people really liked them. Maybe people are just bitter from Sonic 06 or something.
I like them,
reputation.
but the music was a bit. Yeah, I know you liked it, Joe, but.
The music is a product of its time. Yeah. Whenever you played as Amy, it was like ha 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 ya ha ya or something like that.
And that little thing that followed you around.
The chows,
or the chows,
Chow Garden and all that. But yeah, the time's right. I think they should do it.
Absolutely. Come on, Sega, give us what we want. So if you didn't check that out, we'll put that and everything else we talked about in our show notes. All the stories are there each week. You don't have to Google around or anything. You'll find them all on your podcast app or at theretrohour.com. Now, before we get into our chat with Peter Scott, the BBC Micro legend, who's behind games like Predator, SimCity on the BBC Micro, worked on Games Master and The Big Breakfast, the interview this week is brought to you with this amazing new book, Acorn: A World in Pixels by iDesign. Now, brace yourself, boys. That is the book landing on my table. This thing is a beast. 476 pages celebrating the visual games history of the BBC Micro and the Acorn Electron, with this case-bound book contained in a gorgeous slipcase. This thing just feels like premium quality, and it covers over 150 classic games, interviews with people like David Braben and Ian Bell, who are behind Elite, Jeff Crammond, Peter Irvin, Tim Tyler, and also Peter Scott's in this book as well, and also covering stuff like key publishers, cover art and classic magazines as well, and really shows off the inimitable graphic style of the BBC Micro. So you can always tell when you see a BBC Micro, I think, that, that's what machine it is, because it's definitely got a unique look about it, I think.
Oh, it looks absolutely beautiful. And that look as well was the kind of look of teletext. It was the look of me and Dan's youth, pretty much. And, also the Acorn Electron. And those systems, I didn't own one, and I used them though at school and stuff. And when I saw a game on them, I was like, geez, this is absolutely amazing. So for me, reading this, seeing all the games that are showcased on here, like Elite, Chucky Egg, Repton, Exile, it's really something I actually want to explore and look at the old back catalogue of.
Yeah, I mean, last time we mentioned this, we got a load of interest on Twitter. People outside the UK that were just interested in kind of seeing what we grew up with, stuff that maybe they didn't see back in the day. So if you want to get hold of a copy of this book, please do it by using our exclusive discount code, and you will save a massive £5 off the $29.99 RRP of Acorn: A World in Pixels. And also, this comes with free postage and packaging to the UK. Bearing in mind, this thing has got quite a bit of weight to it. I wouldn't be surprised if the postage was about 20 quid, how heavy this is. So definitely check this out right now. Head to iDesign.com. That is IDESINE.com, or follow the link in our show notes. Use our exclusive discount code RETROHOUR and save £5 off your copy of Acorn: A World in Pixels. And of course, support the Retro Hour podcast by supporting our sponsors. Now, just before we get into our interview, let's give a huge thank you to our incredible patrons, the people who keep this show going each week, our favourite people, the people we chat to on our monthly hangout, the people that we even do an exclusive podcast for each month.
Oh, yeah. And they helped us get this set up as well. The show would not be able to work without them. Like, for example, this morning, me and Dan were up at 6 a.m. because we were doing an interview with Australia. And I would...
Not the whole of Australia.
Australia, how are you doing? All right, mate. I just think it's fantastic because we didn't have the flexibility to do this before. And with the Patreon support, we were able to buy these studios and then kind of, just fall out of bed, get it done. I wouldn't have been able to get into Dan's work. I don't even think it would be open at that time where we used to previously record. So it's just amazing to have the support of you guys. And, you guys get something out of it too as well.
Yeah, I mean, the last 12 months, have been challenging for everybody, obviously, but really, we can't overstate enough that this podcast probably wouldn't be going today if it wasn't for the support of our patrons. We couldn't have continued doing it when our studio got shut down last year. So thank you so much for your support. And of course, you do get access to the Retro Hour After Hours, a new episode of which should be out next week. We're going to record another one soon. Another patrons hangout coming up as well. You also get a lot of other bonus perks in there. Get the regular podcast early, get it ad-free as well. And really, you can then tell your friends, that podcast Retro Hour, I make that happen each week. And we will give you a mention in the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Like this week, a big shout to other Retro Matt,
John Treholt,
Rob Fairfield,
Joe HD.
Oh, Joe, you've gone high definition. And Wilburn McBain.
Now, our Joe's only standard def. Yeah, this is Joe HD.
You don't want
Joe
me in HD.
So thank you so much for your support, guys. If you'd like to do the same, you'll find it on our website at theretrohour.com. Right, next we are joined by 8-bit legend and TV superstar Peter Scott is our special guest next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome on this week's very special guest. Now, we have been covering a lot of programmers from the Acorn scene recently, a system and obviously machines that were really, really popular in education and the machines that we all really wanted as a kid, even though they were quite expensive. And today we're going to be talking about some of the best games that were on the Acorn BBC Micro, and also some interesting television work that our guest this week has done over the years as well. So let's welcome him to the Retro Hour podcast, Peter Scott. Hello, Peter.
Hello there.
Great to have you joining us. Now, before we get into the games that you've worked on over the years, it would be quite nice just to kind of get your background. We always try and find out our guests' geek credentials and, kind of what initially got you into computers and gaming. Do you remember where your journey began?
Oh yes. It was Christmas 1981, ZX81. It would be, I suppose, the right year, isn't it? And a Wibbly RAM pack. And I spent on Christmas Day 7 hours typing in a Lunar Lander game where the letter A came to the ground with lots of flickers and no noise whatsoever, because obviously there was no sound on that thing. And then I ran it once, and then the RAM pack wobbled, and then it died, and then it had to cool down in the porch for 2 hours. And that was my Christmas Day 1981. And from that, I thought, well, that's the future. Or maybe I didn't think that, but that was my start anyway.
Typing on that keyboard for that long doesn't sound fun.
No. Well, sort of pressing a piece of wibbly plastic, but try not to wibble it too much, because if the RAM pack wobble would break everything, and the power supply could cook an egg off. It was just quite high quality British computers, mind you, for like £100, which at the time was like an astonishing price. There was actually a sort of proper computer with a tiny amount of memory and and not much else, but it was actually a computer, and that sort of got me hooked somehow.
We've heard so many developers talk about that RAM pack wobble, just losing stuff,
Well, my dad, like being a very practical engineer like he was, got some gaffer tape, which obviously solves almost any engineering problem whatsoever. You could sort of stick a tile to the space shuttle with gaffer tape, and that stopped it wobbling. But obviously, I could never remove it again.
A lot of people use blue tack, so that sounds more advanced than most of us did.
I think it would get quite hot and melt, and then you'd end up with sort of blue tack soup on the table as well, so it might not be that bad.
Well, what about like games on the platform then? What were those games that really captured your imagination?
Well, initially, I mean, being a poor northern lad, I couldn't really afford many. I mean, I had like a tape like ZX Spectrum Games 1, but it was far from things like Jetpack and the Ultimate, Attic Attack, all those fantastic games I turned later. They were quite primitive to begin with, especially in black and white and with no sound. The hardware was pushed a little bit later on. I mean, there's a chess program in 1K, which is quite an achievement, but there wasn't much. And I learned programming just because you used to buy the magazines and type the programs in, and then I eventually realized, well, this is a bit rubbish, and I sort of learned by osmosis really what the commands did, like learning a language, just speaking it and whatever. And that's where I started to fiddle with other people's programs, and then went on to write my own.
Were you influenced by any of the arcade titles and stuff at the time?
I was influenced by sort of anything that was around, really, because it was very new at the time. It was sort of just emerging, and dodgy blokes in the back of magazines selling things they'd written in their bedrooms. It sounds like a crime nowadays, but and what happened after the ZX81 is that I saved up some money and bought a slightly better machine, and basically I had almost every sort of 8-bit computer in the first 2 years. Like I had about 16 different computers, because they all died, because they were all unreliable. I didn't encourage any of them along a bit when I got bored of them or anything. That wasn't something that ever crossed my mind. But I had Oryx and a Lynx and a VIC-20 and this endless Dragon 32 and a Tandy TRS-80, and I had all these different computers, like some of them secondhand, some of them new. And I used to see games on every machine, because, having had every machine, I saw the games on every machine. So I tried to write my own games that looked like some of the nicest games on the machine I had. Taking inspiration from a different machine, and so I became sort of aware of all the different sorts of games on the different machines. So, and basically the brightest and shiniest and nicest looking thing I'd try and write on the current machine I had. Obviously, I'd fail most of the time, but you have to learn somehow.
I guess when you went into the video game shops, you had a huge choice then with all these different machines.
Yes, I mean, I got, for some reason, I bought my computer from Boots, the chemist, which had just started selling them in Newcastle at the time. And so, I take it back and say, well, my Oric 1, the enter key on the terrible little keyboard that was like pills rather than actual keys, it's stuck underneath the thing, and the woman behind the counter was used to giving pensioners their prescriptions, just sort of went, "Oh, I'll give you your money back." It seemed to be the easiest thing to do. So, it wasn't what you call much support or service or anything. But I always wanted a BBC Merry-Go, but I couldn't afford one. Again, mine is kid up north, no money, and it was. I got into the Acorn stuff through the Acorn Electron, which was the cheap, slightly cut down machine. So that's how I got into the whole Acorn thing.
Yeah, because I got an Acorn Electron quite later, actually. I remember, I think my dad got me one, like off a friend in about 1995, very late on. But I'd always had an interest in the Acorn machines from school and, like yourself, could never afford them. Mm-hmm. But the Electron was actually, it gave you quite a lot of the BBC experience, didn't it, at the lower cost?
It did. I mean, if you sort of respected some of the hardware stuff, I mean, in the 4-colour modes, like sort of mode 5, the sort of the chunky but 4-colour mode, it was about as fast and it had the same amount of memory, everything was in the same place. The sound wasn't quite as good, but it was still passable and better than lots of machines. And the thing, for a machine of that time, it was quite quick, especially running BASIC. It was much quicker running BASIC than some of the others were using machine code. So it was a very capable machine. It didn't have things like teletext mode, which I can't, I never particularly used much. And if I want to look at teletext, I could have looked it on the television, and it would actually change occasionally. But and in the high color and high resolution modes, the speed halved, which from a game's point of view was slightly difficult to cope with when you're dealing with an 8-bit machine. So I stayed clear of those modes because of that. Also, it left you with like sort of 7K of memory, which was even less than the 16K you had with the other modes. So it was still.
And of course, the mechanical keyboard that I imagine was a lot nicer than typing on the ZX80.
Oh yes. The keys actually moved. It's like a luxury, actually a luxury.
So you mentioned that you typing in these listings for these games. How did you get into making games yourself? And I actually heard that you then managed to get your own listings published in magazines. What kind of happened there?
Well, again, I think the first one was like sort of a Snake game, like a Nokia phone type thing. But I'd seen it on the VIC-20 on a grid. It was written by Jeff Minter, who became famous for Llamas and Commodore 64s a bit later. But it was just a Snake game on the grid. But the great thing was the new stuff. So I typed the Snake game in, then made a grid and thought, well, that's vaguely different. And then I thought, well, you know what? That's good enough to be in a magazine, because I typed lots of them in. So I just sent it to a magazine and they printed it. And I got a check for 100 quid. I thought, oh, that's nice. They got some cheap content. People got games for nothing. It filled up 9 pages or something because it's quite a long program. It was just in BASIC, but and that was sort of the first thing I did. That, and so that's where I bought my Electron with that money. I'd used a friend's machine. I bought my Electron with that money. So it sort of and when the money I got from magazines, I would spend on getting a better computer. Sort of investing in the inverted commas business, which wasn't much of a business back then. But and so it was just a case of, and then I'd see other games, and I saw Attic Attack, I think, on the Spectrum, and thought, well, I'll do a version of that. So I did a 1-screen version of that and sent it to a magazine. And eventually the magazines would ring me up and ask, oh, have you got a platform game? Have you got something like that? And I'd say, oh, well, I might have in a week's time. And I sort of started to work for the magazines and their publisher companies, just writing stuff. They would ask for stuff, or I'd have an idea for things. And that was how I got started, really.
So that was how you kind of got your first games released by a software house, really?
It was, yeah, like by the publishing arm of the magazine companies who put a few together and released the well, eventually, I mean, they released things commercially on cassette after I'd sort of got my first game with a proper publisher, if you see what I mean. And they went back through all my old games, and the Peter Scott trilogy, a hilariously named and comedy-fronted sort of cassette tape with 3 rather, like, the bargain price of $1.99 for 3 games was some of the magazine games, and they did a few of them. But from there, I wanted to sort of try and break at the proper sort of software stuff. And a mate of mine who lived down the road, Gary Partis, he wrote a game in 3 weeks before doing our GCSEs and earned £2,000. And to a 16-year-old, £2,000 back in 1980, whatever, that was a hell of a lot of money. And I thought, well, I'm about as clever as him. I could probably do something like that. So I thought I'd give it a go. And it took a little bit longer than 3 weeks, but I did get there in the end.
Yeah, because I mean, meeting someone else that was into computers, I know that you and Gary, your kind of journey went from there, didn't it? He worked in the industry as well.
He did, yeah. We sort of accidentally. I mean, we never, apart from at school where we did our computer studies A level in the same class the first time that they taught the A level, and Gary wrote a networking thing to share one disk drive between 30 computers, which just shows you the amount of 30 computers with a lot of computers, but the disk drives were more expensive. It's just a floppy disk drive between 30, and I wrote a word processor, and the Northumberland Education Authority bought it off us. I think they paid us 150 quid each. And it was used in every school in Northumberland for about 5 years. So they got a bargain too, But I got an A for my A level. That's Gary. So that's the only time we actually worked together. But we're sort of mates at school. And then he started work for a company, and I ended up working for the same company. So we ended up traveling like down to London to see the company and stuff together. And we sort of worked together, worked for the same companies anyway for quite a while. And it was just handy. He's a better programmer than me, and I was a bit more of the ideas and trying to make things a bit more playable. So, we had sort of complementary skills, really.
Well, what were your early experiences like with software publishers?
Mixed, I have to say. I mean, again, dodgy blokes on the backs of magazines. There were like quite a few sort of wheelers and dealers who would sort of, promise you the earth and then nothing would sell and you get no money and things like that. But on the other hand, the foundations, I mean, towards the majority of my sort of game stuff was published by Superior Software, who were based in Leeds and run by two brothers, Richard and Steve Hansen, who are just lovely, straightforward, very professional. And the thing that they managed, they paid me royalties up until about 10 years ago for games I wrote 30 years ago. So, I'm still getting not that much money, I have to say. But, I kept my old bank account up north, my student bank account. I kept it open because the occasional check would just sort of be paid into it from them. So, that's all you can ever ask for it when you work for people. But I also worked under a pseudonym for a little while because I was under an exclusive contract, and then I didn't want to work for this company anymore. So I sort of inherited a new name and worked for someone else. The contract they signed me to wasn't particularly legal, or a lawyer I took it to just howled with laughter at it because I'd signed it when I was 16 and all this sort of stuff. But the company I was going to go and work for was a bit worried everything would be delayed by court threats and all this sort of stuff. So I became a mysterious, differently named figure. And which was quite good fun. I was called Dylan, and I signed a signature with a paw print. And my local bank was fine. They set my bank account in the name of Dylan. They'd done Catherine Cookson. That wasn't her real name, apparently. And so that's the only other person northeast with a pseudonym. I don't think she signed with a paw print or anything. But so when I got sent like royalty checks, I took them up and I had to sign the back of the check in front of them, and they'd go and check the signature. New members of staff to the bank thought it was quite an extraordinary thing. This man who had one name and a paw print. But it was just a thing that I did that for like 9 months, and everyone sort of knew it was me, really. But it was just one of those silly things of youth, I suppose. But to get out of a contract,
like Prince or Madonna or something.
Slightly less glamorous. Like imagine that up north in the 80s with bad hair and shoulder pads. Well, mind you, Madonna had bad hair and shoulder pads, didn't she? So I'm not too sure about Prince, but yes, it was quite it was a funny anecdote like for the other programmers around.
And Superior were the kind of biggest software company on the Acorn at the time, weren't they?
They were, yeah. Especially, I suppose, like I got successful just as the Beeb and the Electron were the height of their sort of popularity. But like anything, the machines, like they were popular for a bit and then weren't, and became less popular. But then they got lots of like the first conversion licenses, and I ended up being sort of the person that people would turn up to and say, "Can you convert this to the BBC Micro?" And if I liked the game, I always said yes. I never thought about how I'd actually do it or anything. I just said yes, because if I didn't, it wouldn't get done. I needed a deadline, and there were always very tight deadlines. So I ended up converting lots of very big games, like trying to squeeze them into much less memory, especially like later on when games from the Atari ST or the PC or whatever, to squeeze them into the 20K maximum that I had was a challenge, shall we say.
Well, did that lead you to kind of dropping out of university because you had such a workload on? Well,
yeah, because I take a year off uni, sort of a year before I went to uni, just to sort of like try and make a go of this programming lark. And God bless Margaret Thatcher, which is not something I'd normally say, but the government paid me 40 quid a week for a year. I had to show them I had £2,000 in the bank, which I didn't, but my lovely bank manager, bless his heart, put £2,000 in the bank for a few days, so they checked and it was fine, then took it back again with a 10 quid fee. And so I was on this enterprise allowance schemes, like for small businessmen. There were me and 35 retired miners, and I was 18 and all fresh and everything, and 35 retired miners becoming window cleaners. So the people on the course were going, "Well, we can't tell you much, mate. We've got no clue. Just go home." Okay. So I had some money from that, and I went to uni, and it was sort of like typical, isn't it? Just 2 weeks before I went to uni, then all of a sudden I started getting more and more requests, lots of old games that I'd sent off. Suddenly people seemed to be interested in. And so I did a year of sort of swapping between writing stuff and going to uni, but I wasn't really taking much notice at uni. And the final straw was they told me I wasn't a very good programmer. I should do physics or pure mathematics. And I said, I've got 2 games in the charts. One of them's number 2 in the overall video game charts. I said, look, I've even got a copy of the charts because I'm quite proud of this. And I showed it to uni. I said, I think I'll take a year off. And I took a year off and just didn't go back. So I'm degreeless thanks to that. But I don't regret it in the slightest because, the computer course they were teaching, there was me sort of programming machine code at night and then going and doing this course. And it was of no relation application to anything of any use that I could see anywhere. So it's not that I was cleverer than them; it's just that they were teaching something that wasn't really designed for the modern, well, I say modern, the old way of programming sort of video games. So I dropped out.
I think, education of that era, that was quite a common theme. I mean, I remember being like, the kid at school that knew more about the computers than the teacher did. I think there was a lot of that, wasn't there?
Definitely. I mean, when I was doing our computer studies A-level, there were 6 of us in the class. There were sort of 3 like nerds who were really keen and knew the stuff. The teacher was quite new at the stuff, but he was a lovely bloke, and we sort of helped him out a bit. But it's things like we had to do a past paper for the A-level, and there was only one, so we did it twice. And then the education authority was a little bit confused that I scored 162% or something on that. But I'd done it before, so I kind of knew what the answers were. And a lot of marks came from the projects. And again, we helped the teacher out because he was learning too. It was quite an interesting thing, sort of sharing the burden with the teachers almost. So, mind you, the word processor I wrote, the teacher offered to test it for me, and he was writing a book at the time, and he typed 40 pages of his book in. Then I realised there was a bug in the program; it only saved the first letter from each page.
Oh no!
Oh no way!
Luckily, he didn't fail me or hit me or anything, but he was a little bit jittery the next day, I have to say.
Well, I mean, focusing on the Acorn market for games is quite interesting as well. I mean, it's obviously back then it was quite a niche gaming platform, in many ways. And a lot of kids would be like, I want to program on the C64 or the Specky. Why did you decide to stick with the Acorn market?
Well, initially it was because it was quite, it had a great basic that was fast and was built in and very easy to use. And you could also just drop in little bits of machine code. You could just put little brackets around and type the commands in, which was very unusual. I don't think any of the machines had that. So it was a good way to get into the the machine code, like bare level programming stuff that you sort of had to do to write anything that was vaguely sort of commercially playable as a game. And that was the first thing that attracted me. And then the hardware was quite powerful, not wonderful. I mean, it didn't really have things like the 64 had lots of sprites and and lots of sound channels and stuff, but the brute force of the machine just made it quite interesting. And the sort of people who are programming were a mixture of sort of the hardcore, really hacker type programmers, and some quite interesting sort of characters like the posh kids, shall we call them, which obviously, as you can tell by my voice, isn't me, but your David Brabens and all those sort of people who wrote Elite. So it was an interesting mix of people, very interesting, I have to say. So it was a combination of lots of different reasons, and basically I was just being paid quite well to do the stuff I was doing in the end. So I just stuck at it till the very, very end, till almost the machine was covered in dust in the corner. So.
Well, did you feel it was important to make games that worked on the BBC Micro and the Electron as well?
Well, because I started on the Electron, which was, again, quite unusual, I always tried to make the games work properly on both. I'd worked out a little techie way of sort of running the same program on both, just by limiting a few things technically, and using a certain screen size and a certain format. I could basically 99% of the program would work on both machines, and because I didn't use the very high resolution modes, because you'd end up with not enough memory for the game. It would run fast enough on both of them. And so I went to the people I was working for. I said, look, if I limit the screen like this, if I do this, I can do an Electron version. It'll not cost any more money. It'll hopefully sell a few more copies, and it'll be as good as the BBC version, because often the Electron versions were a bit cut down, or they have garbage on the screen because there's hardly any memory, and and they'd look a bit rubbish. And I, out of pride of sort of coming from that part, I thought, well, I should really sort of do my best. So even up until the very end, I was doing the Electron versions as well as the BBC versions. Just it was a few thousand extra sales, so that didn't hurt anyway.
Well, as well as doing your own games, you worked on conversions. Like, which one did you prefer developing?
I love the creative process of thinking something up. I mean, the first game I did for Spear was called Spy Cat, which was based on the Spy Catcher book, a British spy who'd sort of, retired and written his memoirs. I don't think Electronic Arts would do an international game like this anymore, and he was in court in Australia, and there was all this sort of fuss in the press. So I just thought Spy Catcher, Spy Cat. Okay, so I did a little cat in a Mac. and a funny hat, and he was a spy going around Downing Street and stuff. It was a little platform game, like quite good fun. So I did enjoy the creative process like that. On the other hand, the conversion stuff was more of an intellectual thing, because things I wouldn't program myself, I had to program to make these games work, like 3D stuff, which is really hard on an 8-bit machine and all that sort of thing. So I enjoyed the programming challenge of that. So it's a mix of both. The conversions also being big names. There was big, nice adverts and stuff. The media was, it was covered everywhere, and also it helped the BBC Micro and Electron owners who felt a bit left out of the big commercial games market. It made it just seem a bit more like, we were getting all the good games too. So from a sort of just a snobbish point of view, I quite wanted to do that, just to get those games to come out.
Well, what was the process of creating games for you then? Did you have any specific sets of tools that you'd use?
Towards the end, I'd sort of written my own, basically, because there wasn't really much around. I mean, there were a few bits and pieces, but I had my own sort of level editors and sprite editors and that kind of thing. But it was often, just down the pub thinking up ideas with a couple of mates, or just throwing stuff around. I wrote a football game because someone said there's no good football game where you can actually play the game and do the management side. You can do the management stuff or the player stuff. So I wrote one that combined the two together. And mind you, I was as good at football on video games as I am in real life, as in rubbish. So I'm perfectly well aware of that. But again, that was it sold quite well. It got great reviews everywhere, and people really enjoyed it. So. And I did do a lot of cutesy, platformy, sort of explory, puzzly sort of games, because those were the sort that I really liked playing. So, I just ended up writing quite a lot of them. And it was the most popular genre, I suppose, at the time, probably, a lot on a lot of the machines. It still is. So.
You did Predator as well. That was a huge license. What was it like working on it?
That was one of the it was a last minute thing, and it turned up. I had 4 weeks and 3 days from start to finish to do the game. I was sent a copy of it on the Commodore 64 and nothing else. It was a cassette copy. So I loaded it on 64 and played. I had no idea what was going on towards the end when the little dots zoomed in. I hadn't seen the films, which I watched the film. It was a little even more confused, but because the games didn't seem to fit with the film whatsoever. I just got on with it, and I finished it. I mean, I didn't sleep much for about 4 weeks. Red Bull hadn't been invented back then, but it was just coffee. And I didn't think it was... technically, it looked okay. I got parallax scrolling in it, and I copied everything, apart from the last level, which I couldn't understand, so I just made a one-up myself. And it was released just before Christmas, and it's sold by the bucket load, because I had Arnie on the cover and, a big license and everything. But again, the company was licensed off. I don't think they ever even loaded... They sent a copy, but I don't think they ever loaded it up. They just got a nice fat check for it. So everyone was happy. I got a little annoyed in some ways, because I thought, well, it's not very good, and it sold really well, and I shouldn't complain. By the day, the pay rate then must have been astronomical, because it sold so well, and I was paid royalties on every copy. I was like, oh, okay. But part of me, my young, naive sort of wanting everything to be as good as possible, part of that died when I did that game, I have to say, because, I'd written much better games before and afterwards, and they didn't sell quite as well. And, and it sort of slightly, well, it put me in good stead for working in commercial television, shall we say, which I did later.
Well, that's the thing then. I mean, the power of having a license. I mean, it was kind of new to gaming then. Obviously, Ocean kind of took it and ran after that. But I mean, I guess a lot of the time, these companies just wanted that license on something because they knew people would buy it. And, really it didn't really matter whether the game was great, I guess, to the publishers, but obviously to the people buying it.
Yeah, it was just the big names, and Predator was a movie as well, which again those things were it's funny, like when I was working on Games Master, the TV show, I was working with a guy called Richie Wilcox. He'd written Airwolf for Ocean, and it was quite, and I'd actually nicked the tune from Airwolf to put it in a different game. I played it backwards because I was always having trouble with music. I have absolutely zero musical abilities or propensities, or in every single way. I sing flat. I've got no, and in those days, obviously, no one else did anything. You just did everything yourself, from designing the cover to writing the music, the graphics, and all that sort of stuff. And I had such trouble with music, and everyone always howled at how bad the music was in my games. And I used to get public domain tunes and play them, like literally play them backwards, or miss every other note out, or speed them up or slow them, just desperate to try and get some sort of noise out of a computer that didn't sound dreadful. and it's quite funny. Oh, yes, you nicked that for your platform game. It's like, so it's odd. I did work with someone who'd also been converted. Those ones were looked at very closely by all the TV companies, and I wrote a Nintendo game based on Krusty the Clown. Like, so as you imagine, there was Fox and the Matt Groening and all these high executives in the States, and there was me in my bedroom up north in my little miner's cottage, just trying to explain on the telephone that no, I can't use any other yellow. Nintendo only has 2 yellows, and they're both wrong.
Well, I mean, you did another game, another System 3 game, actually, that you converted, Last Ninja 2. What was kind of the story there?
It had done very, very well on the C64, and it was like a 3D. And I think it was the first multi-level, multi-load thing that I did, which was good fun. Although, again, because you sort of did everything yourself, playtesting through on a cassette to all 165 levels or whatever, it took 8 hours to get to the last screen. And of course, there was a bug on the last screen, and I nearly went mad for 2 weeks just loading this thing in. I have to play it all the way through just to get to this bit where the guy would fall through the floor. I got so demoralised. I rang someone. I can't do this anymore, and so they sent a man up to help me play the game, and he was very tired towards the end of that thing. But we found the bug and it got fixed. It was a bug in the hardware. Actually, it was a bug in Acorn's sort of loading routines. So I reported that to the company and then went to bed for 2 weeks. But and it was such a nice game because it was it looked very pretty, and it had a mixture of fighty stuff and puzzly stuff and isometric 3D and things. And again, I said yes to it because I'd seen it in the magazine, thought it looked very pretty. And then they did the usual thing of just the game turned up with nothing else. But luckily, I'd bought every computer magazine going, and one of them had a huge sort of, cut out and keep map, which I used to base my games on magazine information more than anything I was sent, really, because again, the time was tight, and the information that would eventually turn up, but it would always be incompatible. Graphics from one machine to another, you couldn't actually use them because they'd be the wrong format, the wrong size, the wrong shape, and so if you're sent a disc on an Amiga, like to try and get that onto a BBC Micro via what? The Leeds? No, that'll never work. So it was all a bit sort of, it was easier to start again. So I would just start fresh every time and just give it a go.
Well, another game that you converted that I know probably the game you're most well known for on the BBC was the conversion of SimCity that got highly praised. How did that come about then? How did you get to port that game?
Well, it was another thing that I was told to the Superior Software just about, and they said, well, what sort of games do you think we should do? I said, well, there's lots of games on the PC, and there are things that aren't really games, they're sort of more like simulations. And I'd seen SimCity on the Commodore 64, like sort of a little while before, but the PC version that just come out was getting lots of praise. I said, of course, it would never fit in the BBC Micro. The two guys and my two bosses, Superior, went very quiet on the phone. I went, why are you saying it? We've just got the rights to it. I went, oh, okay. And I said, it'll be a bit difficult. I said, do you think you can do it? I says, well, you know my old policy. Yeah, you all say yes, and then you work it out afterwards. Are you sure, though, Peter? Are you sure? I went, yes. And then that was the first time I'd ever been sent everything, like all the algorithms, all the stuff. And going through the code was fascinating. You plant a tree, and then that helps very, very small amounts to gentrify the area. So the property price go up, the people like it, but then the taxes have to go up to pay for that tree. You've got to water it, you've got to look after it, you've got to prune it every so often. And being an American game, if you put the taxes up, oh dear, no one likes that very much. And then, and I found I went through all the algorithms, and it was bad. Low taxes equals good, high taxes equals bad, which again I understand and I know, but it's not quite as cut and dried as that, is it? So I did fiddle with the algorithm slightly, make it slightly like more appropriate to British audience, because that's who I was aiming it at. But again, I worked rather hard on that, and people just were like looking at me going, "Are you writing whatever?" I still kind of even today. I have dealings with tech companies that rhyme with frugal and Maple and other such companies. And the icon for an app on the Mac is 7 times larger than all of SimCity on the BBC Micro, just like a standard icon. And that's, and I had 150 icons in that game. So, it's quite hilarious how little memory there was to fit these things in. But I got there in the end. Lots of stuff sort of happened by osmosis. It's sort of things that I didn't directly connect together managed to somehow connect themselves together. So So, maybe it's a bit fortuitous, maybe it's just sort of a bit random, but it worked at the end, and I was very pleased with the final product. We even got Godzilla in there, so that was all right.
It's good getting the disasters in there, definitely. Did Will Wright kind of talk to you at all, or
yes,
did you
have
any communication with?
Yeah, I was talking to him. It was via the European license was held at the time by Infogrames, the French company. So I was talking to, occasionally a French person would bring up, and my very bad Geordie schoolboy French wouldn't really help very much. They'd be more confused than if I just spoke English to them. But I spoke to Will Wright a couple of times, just asking a couple of more specific, algorithmic questions and about the disaster things, which were totally random. So it was quite an interesting sort of conversation about that, and they were very helpful. And and he got a BBC micro sent over to have a look at it, and he sent me a very short letter, which I did have friends at the time, just like saying, like, "Brilliant, well done. How do you fit it in that much memory? It's tiny." so I was quite pleased with that, because before I did sort of things like SimCity and stuff, I consider myself a competent programmer, but I was, there were other people who were technically much better than me, who knew hardware better, who could, program right down to the metal better than me. I could get by, and I tried to make games that are playable and looked as pretty as possible, and because that's what I kind of thought games should be. But after I did SimCity, I was a bit chuffed. I thought I'd done something a little bit better than most.
You did another Infogrames game as well, which was Hostage.
Well, that came. It was like a package deal. It was like it used to happen sometimes with the conversions. You get like a big title you wanted, like SimCity, but there'd be another game that maybe wasn't as big a name. Well, can you do that one as well? And you get both of them. And I'm sure there's like some sort of business reasons why that worked more efficiently for both companies. But Hostage was like, it was quite a. It had a 3D maze part. It had sort of a swinging on a road part, and it had a platform game part. But luckily, I'd written those three genres of games before, so I could like dust off what you'd now call a game engine, and like what then I called bits of program lying around in the cupboard. And I could sort of put the whole together quite quickly. So it was it was reasonably efficient from everyone's point of view. It was a really interesting game. It was like even though it was written by some bloke in his bedroom up north, it sort of came out quite French. So I was pleased with that part.
Well, you also did game development diaries for magazines as well. And actually, people can read that in the Acorn A World in Pixels book. There are a few pages of your diaries in there. Why did you decide to do them then and keep records of what you were working on?
It was sort of it was publicity initially. I spoke to the journalists involved, and because I'd come up like via the magazines, I knew most of them. We'd been out for a few drinks together, when we had read up and everything, and and they were always looking for things to put in the magazines, and it just seemed like I could publicise something I was writing, and they were. But also, I was thinking sort of longer term. I'd always sort of thought I'd wanted it to be inverted commas a writer. I didn't quite know what about, but I just quite like the whole process of writing and stuff. And this was a way to get things published, and so I did that, got things published. That got me sort of known within the magazine. So I would then start writing another thing. I started write reviews of weird late night satellite TV shows in a sort of a comedy style for satellite TV magazines. So and then I got some work for the Guardian and for magazines in London. So it was sort of a stepping stone just to do a few different things. So I was ending up watching TV and being paid for that. So I was quite pleased with being paid to watch telly. So the diaries had started off just they'd ring me up, they knew me, so they and often they said yes, and didn't have to come up with the stuff. So it was quite I enjoyed it though. I really enjoyed it.
It must be interesting all these years later to look back on them as well at the process that you're working through.
Embarrassing more than anything else. Especially ones that come with pictures of me with my amusing comedy perm and humongous glasses and, oh dear, fashion up north, 1985, not a nice look. But yeah, it's all there. And, I kind of know that stuff from the past. Well, nowadays with the internet, it never goes away. But but pictures keep coming up with me. It's always the same three terrible pictures, and because there was no good pictures in those days, and no digital software to edit them or anything. So it's quite. It's a little bit sort of, oh god, not that picture again. But I read stuff, and Because was 35-ish years ago. So my memory falters. Yeah, and then I read stuff that reminds me of the strange circumstances that happened, or the odd things that happened there. And so that's yeah, it's all a record of the past, isn't it?
Was the Acorn market kind of a difficult, tough place to be in the early 90s?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it was a sort of it wasn't dying instantly, but it was just one of those markets where you could tell that there wasn't much time left. And I kept I was offered other jobs. I learned how to program the Amiga and the PC. Everything in those, again, early 90s PC stuff was, VGA and purple and cyan and 400 different graphics cards and 300 sound cards. And it just seemed like, I'd been used to writing on one machine with a few variants, and it was all very, very confusing and very, very nasty. So, yeah. So I stuck it out, and to be honest, the Superior software made it sort of possible to earn enough of a living to make it worthwhile. So I kept going, and they kept offering me interesting projects. The conversions were quite interesting. So I just kept at it. But it was early 90s. It was starting to get. I was thinking, well, in a couple of years' time, I'm not going to be able to pay my mortgage, even though my house had cost £12,000 because it was the olden days. So I was just thinking, and I started to look around for some other things to do. So, and I did a few other programming gigs. I wrote some business software, which was a boring thing in the history of the world. And it paid very well, but I wasn't that interested in the money. There's some things I would rather not do. And I managed a small team of programmers up north, which was quite an interesting time. One of the programmers had to fake his own death because he owed some money to the tax man. But yeah, and it's a...
Oh, wow.
We had to hold a pretend funeral. It's all a little bit, sort of frat boys, sort of silly blokes up north. And I was technically their boss, but not really because they were all mates. So there was, much mucking around, and lots of very good games got written somewhere in the background. So towards the end, it did get very difficult. And Superior, they were about the only people still creating. But nowadays, I think there's probably more people writing games now than on these machines than there was like in the early 90s. There's just me then, I think. But now there seems to be like a huge retro community, which I didn't really know anything about until very recently.
Yeah, you must have been one of the last guys at Superior doing games, and I guess I
think it was. Yeah, I was definitely because they had this bunch of SimCity, and there's a couple of other things I did afterwards, and there's some talk of converting some of my original stuff to different machines, which I looked into. In the early 90s, the small companies like Superior were being gobbled up by the bigger companies, the successful ones, on other machines and everything. And Superior weren't really interested in that. So we came to a sort of mutual decision in the end that I just move on. But the great thing was that it had a very, very long tail. Things like SimCity just kept selling and kept selling. Not in very big amounts. I couldn't live off it, but it certainly paid for a few nights down the pub, even 20 years later. So I raise a glass to them getting rights to that one.
Yeah, I think every BBC micro owner bought a copy of it, I imagine. So yeah,
that's the thing when you've got a small market, but people are still quite keen, on games, especially games they can see on other things. They want to feel included in everything. They do sell, and they could charge a little bit more money because they didn't sell as many, but they were still selling quite a few thousand of original titles and stuff, and a big title would still towards the end sell 20, 30, 40,000 copies. So that's, as long as you don't spend forever writing it and have a team of 100 doing 3D graphics and $100 million budget or anything like they do nowadays, then you're okay.
I'm quite interested as well when you mentioned that you worked on platforms after the Acorn. You mentioned the NES there. Tell us a bit more about this Simpsons game then. How did that come about, and what was kind of the story with it? What was that game?
One of the companies that I'd worked for in my early sort of days on the BBC Micro or Digenic, they had a game called Rat Trap, which was like one of those lemming style games where you sort of herd a bunch of rats around, and they all move independently and everything. And via a very strange bunch of coincidences and trips to America and all sorts that I didn't really know anything about at the time, that Rat Trap game became Krusty's Super Funhouse on the SNES and on the Commodore Amiga, and via Claim in the US, and so they worked on the NES at the time, and so up north when I was running the little programming team, we had a guy who did the NES. He ran away about 2 weeks into the project. He just decided he couldn't do it and ran away, and me having run the whole place, I said, well, there was no one else to do it. So I thought, well, I know the process like behind all this. So I took the development system home and all the books and sat there and puzzled it out. And then the Audiogenic flew in another programmer person to help me out. And he ended up being a genius who sort of knew the Nintendo upside down and backwards. And so I ended up doing all the algorithmic stuff, and he ended up doing all the programming stuff. And we made quite a good team. And it was like 3 very intensive months of working. The Americans kept paying us more and more money to try and finish it on time because they wanted it out. And we were working our asses off, but we worked we worked harder. But every week's delay was seeming to like pay us an extra 50 quid a week. So it became like almost comedic, the stuff at the end. We finished like exhausted and everything. The game that came out in the States won awards, did very well over there. But in the UK, the NES was like sort of the SNES had just come out and was taking over. So no one released it in the UK. I was a little bit disappointed. I'd written a game, and The Simpsons was new at the time, and it was the most fabulous. 700 episodes in, it's still going, but it was the most fabulous thing. And I spoke about Groening a couple of times. When he wasn't shouting me about the wrong colour yellow, he was a very, very good and very, very interesting bloke. It was quite a thing. It was like later on in my TV career, I worked on big co-productions with American companies. And I can say things were a little bit more corporate and awkward, whereas that was really good fun. I really enjoyed it. So it was an interesting process.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, back then that was right in the middle of, like Bart Mania, early 90s. I remember being a kid and, we had Sky TV and like my mates had all come around to watch The Simpsons. It was such a hot property back then. I mean, were they quite protective about what you could and couldn't do with the characters? I mean, were they kind of like, up to Disney level where they have all these rules?
They did have a bunch of rules, but I think because they were slightly anarchic, the whole idea of the program was a bit naughty. Bart was the anti-hero. And because this was like Krusty mainly, I mean, it had the other Simpsons characters in, but only in minor roles, and there couldn't be any speaking because you couldn't use the voices and all this sort of stuff. So it's mainly Krusty, and they had the right to do anything they fancied with Krusty. Because that's when I found out that Homer was supposed to be, in the original series, Homer was going to be revealed to be Krusty the Clown at the end, because, and if you think of them, they look very similar. And that was like a little thing, little Easter egg they put in that they decided, like, after it was commissioned for the opening season, not to bother with. But that was mentioned at the time. So I thought, well, we're writing a game with Homer in it, who was always the coolest and stupidest and best character. But no, they were fine, actually. It was just about that pesky colour yellow. That was all that they really bothered about.
Oh, yeah, I remember even doing an assembly at primary school, and they sat us all down and said, this is a really good new TV show, and showed us The Simpsons on a small television, and we all sat there like engrossed. You made the move into TV and got a job on Games Master. So what was the story there? How did you make the transition?
Things were coming towards the end. I'd finished the Acorn stuff, and we done the NES thing, and I was basically sort of thinking, well, what do I do next? And I had a few offers to go and work in, like, for other games companies and everything. And I was like, the thing I really want to do was like be a games designer. But that didn't really exist as a job title back then, because you were programmers, and they were just about graphic artists emerging and people specializing in this, that, and the other. The bigger companies and you had those sort of people, but the games design part was normally still like what programmers did. I saw this advert in The Guardian that said, like, new games TV service launching in 9 months' time. Apply here. And I was like, it's a tiny little advert. And I thought, oh, well, I know games. So I sent a comedy CV off, and, a jokey thing with my phone number in it and everything. I didn't really expect anything. My answer machine at the time, because I was, a 23, 24-year-old bloke, said, like, hello, Peter's too busy having drugs and taking drugs and having sex to answer the phone right now. Leave a message. And this really strange woman left a message like going, if you're taking drugs, I'm not employing you. Come for an interview anywhere. I assume it's a joke. I have no sense of humor. I'm from New Zealand. So I rang back then, like, very late at night, just thinking I'd get the machine. I got this strange woman who was Jane Hewland, the boss of the company who made Games Master. She said, come for an interview tomorrow. It's got to be soon. I said, but it's starting in 9 months' time. She said, come for an interview tomorrow. So I did. I had to wait 6 hours to be interviewed after getting with 5 in the morning. She said, right, I don't know quite what I said. It was all a little bit of a blur. I remember seeing Dominic Diamond across the room thinking, there's celebrities here. I must have said the right thing, because she says, you start now. There's your desk over there. Offering me a tiny little wage. And part of me just went, oh, well, okay, then right, I'll give it a go. And 3 weeks later, I was writing lines for Dominic to say on the television and Patrick Moore to say as Games Master. 3 months later, I was producing a show that I thought up, and a year later, I was head of development for the entire company. So something sort of clicked, I think. And Auntie Jane Hewland, bless her heart, still has no sense of humour. She doesn't live very far away from me, but otherwise she employed me and like give me my break and tell you, for which I'm eternally grateful. But my games experience meant I knew some of the people in the games industry. Obviously, having a comedy Geordie accent is quite unusual in television, apart from them Ant and Dec. So people remembered me when I rang them up. My first job was to research cheats. They press A, B, C, D. And I was astonished that the children didn't actually come and ask the questions themselves. You wrote them and gave them to the children. It's like, oh, okay. You took their questions anyway and you researched into them, which I soon found out didn't really happen. Then from then I was just working in telly. And then the game service that they mentioned was Games World on Sky, which did start 6 months later. And I worked on that for across hundreds of episodes, from live shows to game shows. I employed David Walliams when he was fresh out of university to be in a silly little show where he dressed up like a lady and told lots of silly jokes. And so I apologise to the world for David. No, I don't really. I mean, he was David Walliams was a very unique man. He was always much funnier than he should have been. And he made our show rather better than it should have been. And I'll also be eternally grateful. We had a great old time working on that show. And then I thought, can we do a sitcom? And Sky sort of went, yeah, if you want. Your budget's tiny. I went, okay. So we made a sitcom with Williams in it about video games, because, why not? But Games Master was great fun because it was just when it was sort of becoming really popular, and there was a bit of money in the budget. The first series there was almost no money, but the second series, and there's a bunch of blokes, most of whom were northern, most of whom were in London, didn't have hadn't worked in telly before, and we had a great old time. It was great fun.
Do you have any particular memories of Games Master and Games World, like any parts that stood out for you?
Well, there are bits that sort of going down to see Games Master being filmed and just like standing on set and like wow, and then I think who was that? Take That were there, but they weren't really very famous. They were just this this strange band who wore rubber and stuff. It's quite an odd thing, and Dominic Dyer was a great old chap in that we were down the pub at lunchtime and in the evening, so that slightly makes it more difficult to remember. I was put in charge of Series 3, which is when Dominic had decided that being sponsored by McDonald's was not something that fitted with his morals. and so Dexter Fletcher was the presenter for that very strange series. And we filmed the first part in Oxford Prison. And I was always, the children were going to fall off the balconies and down into the atrium. And we filmed 13 episodes there. We went back to film the second 13 episodes, except they recommissioned the prison, so there's prisoners in it. So we couldn't really film, so we had to film somewhere else with no notice. So it was a nightmare of logistics to do. But it was good fun, and Dexter was a great old chap, and now he's a Hollywood director, isn't he? But just like sort of the vague things of just writing amusing lines about vague celebrities turning up, Vic and Bob and all sorts of people. And Games World was like this little show that used to get 1 million viewers every night on Sky One at 6:30. It was on every day. And we used to get letters from Bosnia, from the British troops who were over there before it was scrambled and became digital and everything. It was astonishing. And I employed Jet from Gladiators in a rubber dress, who was the games mistress, because obviously I'd worked on Games Master, so have to be fair. So we had the games mistress, and she wore this tiny little rubber dress, and I had to puncture a repair kit because it kept bursting. She's very popular with the audience, as you can imagine, and she made lots of innuendos. Her first line was, "Welcome to my little slot," she said, smiling to camera. And she was fabulous. She had no idea about video games, to be honest, but she was great on camera. And I had they let me do what I fancied doing, so. And then I went to live TV and did Bouncing Dwarfs and Topless Darts, and Head of Stupid Ideas was my actual job title. I mean, you can't get
you
better.
were responsible for those then.
I apologise in every single way for everything that we ever did.
And that went on to Channel 5 as well, didn't it, on the early days after live TV?
Yes, it did. We did the weather in Norwegian, where the lady in an evening frock would tell you the weather in Britain in Norwegian, then tell you the weather in Norway in English. I mean, I don't know why that was not my idea. But stuttering newsreaders, that was another thing we did. It took rather a long time for them to read a 2-minute news bulletin, but it was a silly sort of jolly little cable station, and hardly anyone watched, and it was people were thinking of silly ideas. I thought of an idea; it would be on air in 10 minutes, and and then it'd be rubbish.
Was Sacha Baron Cohen involved in that as well?
He was there for a bit of the time, and Richard Thingy off of Blue Peter, and all sorts of people who went on to become proper normal presenters. Also, Esther McVeigh, who I think is a Tory MP now. she wasn't a Tory MP then, but it was a strange. Janice reporter ran it for a bit, but then left because my one suggestion to try and save money was, why does things have to be live? Because that's quite expensive. It was called live TV, but no one seemed to care, so they fired half the staff and then pre-recorded everything in big batches to save money, which didn't make me particularly popular in the canteen, I have to say. But it was a very interesting time, a very strange sort of like late 90s sort of strange culture. People used to nick our cameras because we couldn't afford any security and stuff. And we made more money selling the bloopers when the cameras were nicked than anything else. When the news was on, someone dressed up like a bunny in the background and like sort of did like comedy gestures. Apart from when Princess Diana died, when we had to wear a black armband, dressed up as a giant bunny. None of this makes any sense now. I look back at it. The programming stuff makes much more sense than this, I have to say.
One thing I love about your time on Games Master as well is you're actually awarded the worst hairstyle of the series, which I thought was quite an achievement when Jazz Rignall was a regular guest on the show.
Yes.
I've got to say.
I mean, that was on the final episode because they filmed me. I've been in charge of organising reviews, and a person at review didn't turn up, and so they put me on to do it because that's what you do. You have to suffer by going on screen. It was the Christmas Eve episode, I think the highest rated episode ever. There I was, and I'd gone up north to see my family that Christmas. There I was on screen, and they used the same line. They're putting the same line about each. This is about as playable as a box of used tissues, which makes no sense whatsoever. It was the end of a 12-hour filming day. I was exhausted, and they used the same line 3 times. My family looked at me going, "What do you say that for?" I'm like, "Oh God," the most embarrassing thing. That was my television career in front of them. But I had quite I was very glad when my hair fell out because it was always causing me trouble. And I've appeared in a couple more episodes just as like commentating and doing stuff again when other people didn't turn up. My only defense is it was the end of a long day and it was sticking up all over the place. So yes, and the 90s and blonde bits and ginger and it was wonderful.
Well, Peter, I know it's not gaming related, but we need to ask you about this because such nostalgia. The Big Breakfast. For people outside the UK, that was a show that everybody watched on TV before you went to school or college back in the day. What was your involvement with The Big Breakfast?
Well after I'd done Bouncing Dwarfs and had sort of written off my television career as I'd never be Director General of the BBC after all that kind of thing, I started my own little company. I called it Impossible Television. Someday all good television will be impossible, I said. That was my slogan. And tomorrow's television tomorrow. That was the other slogan. And Plan 24 sort of funded me setting myself up as a company. So we did we wrote some interactive games that were played on The Big Breakfast. A driving game called Skid Marks. You can sort of sense the humour, the level of humour there. And so I went down to The Big Breakfast, set the whole thing up, and then we made some title sequences, we did some bits and pieces, like some comedy animation for them, and being the company that made that show, it was a huge show that was just sort of everyone who was at the company was involved with, and so I was roped into helping develop ideas for it and audition presenters because getting the right presenters were always the hardest thing to do. So I remember being down there when they were doing Jenga dressed up as giant eggs. Denise Van Outen and Johnny Vaughan dressed up and it overran by 2 hours, and they kept it on air. Channel 4 just kept it on air because it was just Jenga, and it was it was that kind of fantastic show. So it was great fun. But being that jolly at 7:01 in the morning is quite a difficult thing to do every day. I think you have to be of a certain disposition or drink even more coffee than I drink to be that jolly at 7 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. And nowadays, the show repeats of all. The basic idea was it was Saturday morning kids TV for adults every day, which is a great idea, I have to say.
And what were Zig and Zag like as well?
The man who ran Zig and Zag was one of the funniest, sort of most intense people, and it's just disconcerting because hearing that voice coming out of an actual person and not those two strange puppets, it was quite a thing. But it was one of the first shows that the crew were involved in it and would laugh, and because they couldn't afford an audience, no one would turn up at 7 o'clock in the morning on a cold in an industrial state in East London to stand in the garden or anything. So it was and Chris Evans, I remember we having rather too many drinks with Mr. Evans. He offered me a job when he set up his company and some shares in it, and I said, oh no, I'm not working for you, that won't last. I could have made a fortune or something, but not one of my most sensible decisions, but I can't really complain. It was great fun, and again, you got the Spice Girls turned up and came to my office by mistake before they became huge and did their little sing song. I was going, what are you singing at me for? I make cartoons, go away. And they got told off for being flat as well, and they weren't allowed on the show. So it's astonishing.
I mean, that show was incredible. Like you said, the show repeats in the morning now. I really do miss, something like The Big Breakfast being on TV. And for our overseas listeners or anyone that's too young to remember it, I will put a link to Zig and Zag's music video for them girls in the show notes as well. They need to check it out.
It was great stuff. It was just a sort of I think it was tried around the world. In some countries it did quite well. In other countries, in the States, I remember just they had no idea what this thing was. They were used to fairly serious, like morning news. Even on the 50s, their breakfast shows was presented by a monkey. It was quite an odd thing. And Plan 24, the company that I worked for, did Survivor, so the first reality show, so reality television, sort of all stems from these sort of programs. So, and The Word, which was a late night, very strange, clubby sort of program, where there were people in charge of thinking up things that you really didn't want to be involved with ideas-wise, like people who do anything to get on television, and they literally did. So it's just quite a thing.
Well, Peter, it's been incredible reminiscing with you, and some amazing stories over the last hour. What are you working on these days, then?
I'm working on lots of different things, really. I do corporate speaking. I'm the comedy person that after some big technology event will turn up on the Friday afternoon and tell the developers how they don't understand how normal people use their things, and I make some technology jokes. I hopefully suggest a few good ideas here and there that they might quite like. So I do that, and I really enjoy that. It's like being a stand-up comedian, but with better pay. My cat's howling at me. Stop howling, cat. And I've been working on a movie for a little while, and I have to say the movie industry is even funnier than television. It's very good fun. And I write scripts, and I've written a book about television shows, so about as television as you can get, which is hopefully coming out in sort of 3 or 4 months' time. And so I'm working across a lot of projects. I'm having quite a lot of fun working across different projects.
Well, Peter, you've had such a varied and interesting career so far, and of course, if people want to read more about it, there is, I think it's about 10 pages with you in the Acorn: A World in Pixels book. So, of course, that will be linked up in our show notes as well. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Peter. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your stories with us.
Well, you're welcome. As you can probably tell, I don't mind talking about myself in the slightest, so that's absolutely fine with me. Thank you for having me.